Welcome to Future Talk. My guest today is Cassandra Vieten, President of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which conducts research into the nature of consciousness and how to unlock the full potential of the human mind. The Institute of Noetic Sciences, or IONS, was founded in 1973 by Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, one of the few men to have walked on the moon. On his way back to Earth, Mitchell reported that he had an intense experience of the oneness and interconnectedness of all life. The experience was so powerful that he founded IONS in order to study the phenomenon, try to bring it into the realm of science, and replicate it so others could experience it as well. In addition to being the current president of IONS, Cassandra Vieten is also a mind-body medicine research scientist, a licensed clinical psychologist, and the author of several books, including Living Deeply, The Art and Science of Transformation in Everyday Life, and also Spiritual and Religious Competencies in Clinical Practice, Guidelines for Psychotherapists and Mental Health Professionals. Cassie, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Cassie, what exactly does noetic science stand for? What does that mean?
Well, the word noetic comes from the Greek, noesis, which is the inner form of knowing. So the Greeks had a couple of different words for knowledge, and noetic is the inner form of knowing, whereas science in our modern day is the what you could call external way of knowing, observation, hypothesis, measurement, things that you can see through the eyes or feel with the senses. So noetic science together is combining the deep wisdom of inner experience with external observation.
So do you actually do research? Do you actually make progress at opening up this kind of experience to more people?
Well, IONS is really founded, as you mentioned, by Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut, and the founding vision came on his way back from the moon to Earth, where he had this direct knowing. He felt like it was kind of like a direct download from the universe. He instantly knew, for example, that he felt one with everything he saw, the Earth, the stars, the moon, the sun. He knew at some deep level that the molecules of his body were the same molecules as the space capsule and the Earth and the stars and the moon. And that kind of direct knowledge is not something he'd experienced before in that way. So when he came back to Earth, he really wanted to find out, if that direct knowing has opened my mind to new possibilities, what do we know about that form of knowledge? And in a way, what he did was came back and said, I've spent the first part of my life exploring outer space. Now I'm going to spend the second part of my life exploring inner space.
Now, if you have an experience of knowing, does that mean that the thing you know is really true?
Definitely not. So all of us have mistaken knowledge all the time. We have subjective experiences that are very susceptible to bias, to implicit assumptions, to illusions. And that's why science was born, is at one point in our history as a society, we really relied almost completely on superstitious or subjective knowledge, much of which was not even our own direct experience, but was being delivered to us at the time from the religious leaders and priests and the church. You know, back then people weren't even allowed to read the Bible for themselves, much less explore the universe or the natural world on their own. So science is something that endeavors to eliminate the bias and the assumptions and the misunderstandings and mistakes of perception that we all have. The problem is that science by itself then also seems to eliminate some very important ways of knowing: wisdom, deep intuition, gut feelings, hunches, our own experience. And so what we do at the Institute of Noetic Sciences is, first of all, train the lens of science onto those kinds of experiences, intuitions, gut feelings, hunches, direct knowing. And then we also try to inform our hypotheses and our methods with that kind of intuitive wisdom and knowledge. Now, we're not contaminating the scientific method. We do believe in the actual scientific method that does strive to eliminate bias. But we think that the questions we ask can be influenced by our aha moments and inspirations and dreams and imagination and intuition.
Now, do you have any model for what consciousness really is? Is it internally combined in your brain? Is somebody at a higher level feeding you information? Or is the universe like a radio station that broadcasts on multiple frequencies and you can turn the dial to select the frequency you want to tune into?
Well, those are all good shorthand descriptions of theories of consciousness that are currently out there. At IONS, when we talk about consciousness, we talk about it at multiple levels. So one is conscious awareness, or your personal consciousness, where you're awake and aware and you know you think something. That's like the most basic level of consciousness, is conscious awareness. Then there's the level of personal consciousness of what you're aware of and what you're not aware of. And that's those biases, assumptions, implicit knowing, the things you do just by rote or by habit, like when you drive to work and you don't know how you got there. That is also a part of our consciousness. And actually, some research now shows that that aspect of our consciousness drives us a lot more than what we're aware of. Then there's what maybe Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, or what spiritual traditions have called the shared ground of being. There seems to be some level of consciousness or awareness that isn't just personal, but it's shared by lots of people. And that's why we think that sometimes people, when you have that experience of, for example, knowing that somebody is in trouble at a distance, somebody that you love, and you find out later that they were in trouble, or someone calls on the phone and you know who it is, even though you haven't talked to them in 6 months and you had no way of knowing they might be calling. Those experiences could be coincidence, but they also are so common and everybody knows what you mean when you talk about them. They could be giving us clues to another level of consciousness where we have some connection with each other.
So it sounds like you can receive information outside of your sense organs. There's a theory that says that the only pathway to the brain is through your eyes, ears, nose, etc. If it doesn't come through those, it doesn't exist. But that's obviously not true. For example, when you're sleeping and dreaming, you're experiencing sight, but it's not coming through your eyes. So is it possible that thoughts are real things and the mind can receive and send thoughts directly bypassing the physical sense organs?
It's definitely possible, and that's what we're looking into. You know, most people, actually many of our scientific discoveries over millennia now, our biggest insights as humans have come from these aha moments or these imaginal realms. And so one great example of that is the person who invented the sewing machine was really stuck on how the machine was going to get the needle to move through the fabric with the thread on the end of it. And he had a dream where he encountered an indigenous tribe and they had spears and they had holes at the end of their spears. And so when he woke up, he said, I got to put the needle, I have to put the hole at the end of the needle, not at the pointed end of the needle, not at the other end.
Now, does that require a spiritual explanation? Because you can be totally rational and scientific and look at any object and instantly think of every possible use for that object and every possible variation without necessarily bringing it into the realm of spirituality.
Yeah, I don't really think any of the things that we have talked about so far or will be talking about necessarily need to have a spiritual explanation. It's more that there are multiple ways of knowing the world. One of those ways is science, where you make an observation, you form a hypothesis about that observation, you set up a system where you can test whether or not your hypothesis is true, trying to get rid of as much error as you can, and then what you find either supports or doesn't support your hypothesis. Another way of knowing is spiritual, where you engage in practices or in teachings or in environments and communities where you have wisdom that comes from those practices, from that interaction with ritual or symbol. And that's another valid way of knowing. And our core premise really is that both of those ways of knowing are important. They're not exclusive of one another. They're actually quite complementary. And that it's time to kind of break down the barriers between the two and allow them to communicate with each other. And that it may be at the nexus of those two ways of knowing that we find solutions to problems that have been thorny issues for millennia.
And you feel that IONS is making much progress in that realm? Because you've been in business over 40 years. Have there been any breakthroughs or achievements where you could say, yeah, when we started, we didn't know how to do this, and now we can do this?
Yeah, well, IONS really has three primary areas of focus in our science, in our education, in our community, and in our programs for people to have direct experiences of these things. And those are consciousness and healing, or mind-body medicine, extended human capacities, or what are we really capable of, and worldview transformation. How do people have experiences like Edgar's, not having to necessarily be in a space capsule, but being here on Earth, where they shift their awareness or the way they experience consciousness in ways that have long-lasting influences on how they see themselves, how they see their relationships, and how they see the world.
Do you think that changing people's environments can stimulate this sort of thing? Now, Edgar Mitchell had to walk on the moon before he experienced it. Maybe you don't have to do anything that drastic, but if you shake up your daily routine, does that somehow influence you in the direction of you're rearranging the furniture in your mind, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, sometimes the analogy we use is that transformation or a shift in the way you think about the world. Let's say you've got someone whose life has been mostly about accrual of stuff, achievements, getting accolades from the outside. Some people would call it sort of an ego-driven life, that, you know, it's really all about what can I get, how can I get people to appreciate me. They have some experience, sometimes beautiful and awe-inspiring, sometimes painful and distressing and deconstructive. But either way, those experiences can lead them to a place where their priorities are sort of like a deck of cards that gets flipped into the air, onto the floor. When they pick it back up, the cards that are on the top are now their highest priorities, where what they thought was important is closer to the bottom. So those higher priorities might be love and connection and meaning and purpose, compassion, altruism, helping other people. And when people have those experiences, we like to say we can't make them happen, but we can create conditions that make them more likely to happen, or if they happen, make them more likely to take hold and to end in a positive way.
Now, some people report that they've achieved similar experiences through taking certain types of drugs. Is that legitimate? Are there shortcuts to this type of consciousness, chemical means?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would call plant agents or psychedelics or entheogens a shortcut, because even if you have a kind of glimpse of what is maybe what Aldous Huxley called cleansing the doors of perception, and you get this vista into what's true, what's possible, most people say, and even people who are really steeped in psychedelic work will say, that there needs to be a lot of integration of those experiences over the rest of somebody's life. So someone might say, well, I had an experience that transformed me, and then I spent the rest of my life living into that transformation. So you can have a sort of vision of something that's possible, but I think you still have to do the day-to-day work of integrating it into your relationships, into your work, into how you treat other people. In some ways, when we've done this research on transformations in consciousness, people have told us it really doesn't matter if you see the world in a different way, if it doesn't change how you are and who you are and how you engage with the world around you.
So what's the ultimate benefit of this kind of work? Let's say that through some discipline, you acquire a very strong feeling that all of life is interconnected, and you shouldn't hate anybody because he's just kind of a reflection of yourself. Mm-hmm. So how would that change things?
Well, if you think about the things that concern you most, as maybe take even a couple of seconds now to think about what concerns you most on this planet. And when we do this with audiences of people, and maybe the people who are watching this show, and they take a minute to think about it, almost everyone thinks about a problem that at its root is some limitation in human consciousness. It's something that humans either have mistaken, it's something that we haven't invented yet, it's something that we haven't innovated on yet. So for example, environmental degradation or climate change or extinction of species or war, violence, inequity of resources, racism, sexism, all of these things, it's not that we don't have enough resources on the planet to take care of everyone and feed everyone, it's that we're not getting them to people. And part of why we're not getting them to people is we think those people over there are different and we are our people. And if we really saw ourselves as interconnected and interdependent, it would be very difficult to continue to engage in behaviors that benefit myself while harming others.
Do you think we have a particular purpose for being here? I mean, we're just here by a series of random accidents and coincidences, or now that we're here, is there something that we ought to be doing or that we're expected to be doing?
Well, I'm not sure. That's a really big question, but what I can say is the people that we have talked to in our research on how people have positive transformations in consciousness, they have come to a place through those transformational experiences and practices that make them feel a sense of purpose and belonging, and that once they get to a place where they feel like, actually, it's not just about me, it's about we, and they start to take actions that don't just benefit themselves but benefit everyone, paradoxically, they find the personal joy and contentment that they had been seeking through all of their other self-promoting behaviors. And so I find that really interesting. And I was actually just talking to a friend who's part of our IONS community who said, maybe it's not about purpose, it's about impact. What impact am I having in the world? And there needs to exist a certain level of awareness or consciousness before you can even begin to understand what impact you're having in the world.
Now, some people have an epiphany, a sudden realization, and maybe in a 10-second period, this feeling is imprinted so strongly on them that it influences their actions for the rest of their life. Is that something you're trying to achieve, where that level of experience is so intense, it just determines everything you do from then on, even if it's only a few seconds long and it never happens again?
I think it's very rare for someone to have one single experience in their life that changes everything. What you'll find is that leading up to it were a whole lot of priming experiences, so that they might perceive that that one experience changed everything, but they had been working up to it for some time. Or you find that they have an experience that changes everything, but they still have quite a lot of work to do to integrate that into their everyday life. So some people do have that Jesus on the road to Damascus, lightning bolt experience that changes everything. But it still requires quite a bit of time and energy and effort and dedication for them to live that every day.
Now, does your work, is it generally accepted by scientists? Do they say, well, I think these people are onto something here? Or they say, well, as long as we can't measure it, then it doesn't enter our consciousness?
Well, I'd say so far what we've been talking about is mostly our transformation research, and that pushes people a little bit, but they sort of go, okay, I get it. I'd like to know more about how to change my life, or what conditions could I present to people that would make it more likely for them to make positive changes. When you start moving into consciousness and healing, or the role of the mind in healing our own bodies, now that has a little bit more acceptance now, but that starts to push people a little bit further. They're like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Is this kind of woo-woo stuff? And even though, IONS was at the very front end of the mind-body medicine revolution, and we funded some of the first studies on meditation and well-being, like Herb Benson at Harvard, and several different studies on love and forgiveness and the positive benefits of those on our physiology. And now there's a mind-body medicine clinic in almost every major medical center across the US and even around the world in developed countries. However, many of those are still kind of off to the side. Insurance doesn't pay for them. People still have to pay privately for them. They're sort of luxury add-ons. They're not integrated fully into healthcare. So we'd like to see that happen. We also are very interested in energy medicine, and is it true that any of these modalities that people engage in, like Reiki or therapeutic touch or even acupuncture and acupressure, were originally forms of energy medicine? So is there an energy body? Now, when we start to talk about that kind of thing, then the mainstream scientific community gets a little bit itchy. And then if we go into our third realm of extended human capacities, where we start to talk about investigating using rigorous scientific methods, telepathy, ESP, precognition, remote viewing, mediumship, that's when the mainstream scientific community gets very uncomfortable.
Unless you can repeat it and demonstrate it, then they love it.
Yes, we actually do repeat. There are many, many meta-analyses now about these kinds of studies, looking at, let's say, whether information is transferable across a distance at higher than what would be expected by chance. So these are highly statistically significant, repeatable effects that seem to be robust. They're quite small in terms of the actual effect, but the statistical chance that they would be observed by chance is very, very remote. So we have very strong clues that show us that these kinds of experiences happen commonly, number one, and that we can make them happen in controlled conditions, but we haven't yet got to the point where we can make them happen every single time, or we found the one person who can do it every single time. And so that's what we are still working on.
Now, you're in the healing professions yourself. You're a licensed clinical psychologist. In fact, you have a recent book out, got a copy of it right there.
Yeah.
Maybe you could hold it up. It's called Spiritual and Religious Competencies in Clinical Practice. And what you're basically saying there is that most psychotherapy patients, like most people in general, have some kind of spiritual or religious beliefs. And the therapist has to respect that and work with it and not dismiss it. Sounds kind of obvious. Why is it necessary to tell people that?
It is kind of surprising that even in the fields of psychiatry and psychology and psychotherapy, other than some domains of those fields where people are very interested in spirituality, like transpersonal psychology or spiritually oriented psychotherapies, the vast majority of mental health professionals receive very little or no training at all in spiritual, religious, or consciousness-based resources that patients may have available to them for their mental health or their recovery from addictions or anxiety or depression. And I think it's because there remains still a little bit of a taboo where psychologists and psychiatrists are like, we're in the scientific domain, we really don't want to be contaminated by any kind of spiritual or religious thing, go see your pastor for that. Well, now there are a lot of people who are experiencing mental health conditions that have to do with not feeling a sense of hope or meaning or purpose or belonging. And we know now that spiritual and religious and integral body, mind, spirit practices not only enhance health and well-being, they can be used as resources in people's treatment and in their recovery.
Well, I think those sort of things add meaning and purpose to life, and I think meaning and purpose are very healthy.
Yeah.
A person without meaning and purpose doesn't know what direction to go in, he gets kind of lost.
Yeah, yeah. And I just think that, you know, like other forms of diversity, we teach psychologists and psychotherapists a lot about ethnic diversity, racial diversity, gender, sexual orientation, and spiritual and religious beliefs are just another form of diversity that we think should be welcomed into the therapy room.
Now, as far as attaining what we might call a higher level of consciousness, is that mostly a matter of getting rid of all the background static in your mind so that you can perceive the universe that's coming at you all the time, but there's too much static on your end to take it in?
It could be, yeah. Sometimes we think of transformative practices like meditation or yoga or martial arts, Tai Chi, Qigong, prayer, other forms of contemplation as things that are like training a muscle or learning a language, that the more you do it, the better you get at being in a place that is centered and grounded and calm, even in the midst of all of the storms that life may bring to you, whether it's a sunny day that's calm or a hurricane day or a tornado day or a rain day. There's an aspect of us that stays more like the space that the weather is happening in. It's not changing, it's just a container for all of those things. And when people can have those experiences over and over, they're more likely to stay non-reactive in the face of stressors. That's true, but there's also this way that these practices are, in a way, you know, there was this misquote at one point that I still think is a great quote, so I still quote the misquote, which is that they asked Michelangelo how he created the statue David, and he said, I just chipped away everything that wasn't David. And so apparently that's not even true, but everybody understands what you mean when you say that, that sometimes these practices are subtractive. They're taking away false selves, false beliefs. They're bringing biases and assumptions to the level of conscious awareness so that if you don't get rid of them, you might be able to at least see, oh, that's one of my things that I do. I'm going to give that a little bit less weight.
Now, we've been talking about developing full human potential. If a person were to develop their full potential, what would they be able to do that we couldn't do now? Like, could you heal yourself at will of disease? Like, you'd never catch cold. You'd be tolerant of different degrees of temperature. Your body would stay healthy. Your joints wouldn't hurt. And your mind would, you would be thinking the thoughts you wanted to have in your mind and not be filled with thoughts you didn't want to be there.
Well, I'm not sure I would go quite that far that this will be the cure-all for every symptom or illness that anybody might have. But what I can say is that if you think about the last maybe 20 times you went to see your physician, they may have asked you about your symptoms, they may have prescribed a drug, they may have prescribed some sort of an intervention, like a surgical intervention. Most of us, it's not very likely that our physician said, now let's turn your attention toward this and what you can do with your mind to help heal this thing. How can we harness what has been called the placebo effect, but really can be considered a mind-body healing effect? So one of the examples we're using right now is we've developed a virtual reality laboratory at IONS, and it's headed up by Lauren Carpenter, who is the co-founder of Pixar Animation Studios and has 2 Academy Awards for inventing 3D landscape modeling in film and other things. And we're creating environments where, let's say somebody in chronic pain can use their mind to try to ease their own chronic pain, except they're not just doing it in their imagination, they're actually doing it in a virtual reality environment. So we're going to take a picture of them when they come in. They'll be able to see a model of their body. They might be able to see a red light throbbing in the pain place and then use their mind to make that turn cooler and cooler, maybe blue, maybe into a stream. And we're going to find out if using that imagery, with the assistance of virtual reality, can help someone take their mind and use it to ease some of the pain in their body. So what I would say is that we are underutilizing our minds in healing our bodies, and we're probably underutilizing our minds in healing other people as well.
Okay, very good. Now I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it right there because we are out of time. I've been speaking with Cassandra Vieten, president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Thank you for coming. Very interesting topic. Thank you for watching. Visit our website, www.futuretalk.net. For Future Talk, I'm Marty Wasserman, and we'll see you next time.